Eric Vogelpohl, and just wanted to do a quick recap on Gartner's Data and Analytics Summit that took place in Orlando, Florida, over the course of the past 2 days. First thing, just start off keynote, there was a lot of discussion around generative AI, and this being 2024 being the year really around execution, right? So primarily execution, 3% strategy, 97% execution, what's actually achievable, and obviously being heavily dependent on data quality. Any other comments you would make based on the keynote?
It seemed to me that this was somewhat of a transition year at Gartner. The keynote, I think, was titled "Making Structure Out of Chaos" or something like that. But you could see that clearly this was a year when Gen AI is now a year and a quarter into its life, year and a half into its life, and profoundly impacting all areas of the data world. So not only from creation to analysis to governance to tagging to all kinds of things. So they gave some really good recommendations on how to wade into this emerging transition that we're in.
Yeah, it was a great setup and tee up, obviously, for the rest of the week. Another topic that popped up, we attended a session around data mesh versus data fabric. I got quite an education over the course of the past couple of days on this from Eric. Obviously, I know you're very opinionated about this. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how it relates to other concepts that we've heard, like data hub and data product?
Yeah. So first of all, I thought the Gartner team, they had a two act kind of a portrayal on this session. They did a really good job. One guy took the advocate of a data mesh method, and the other one took the fabric method. It stayed very agnostic any technology. So there was really no technology discussion here, because the point they made was that it's not a technology discussion at this point. Fabric and mesh are organizational structures. They're ways of thinking about the metadata and how it impacts instrumentation and orchestration and how it affects users. And then, of course, with data mesh, that's largely data fabric. And of course, with data mesh, still relatively new, but it's based on the four core principles of the mesh concept, which is product orientation, so treating your data sets and their associated components as a product. No longer domain stewardship, but domain ownership. That's key. So in a mesh, you have the ability to wholesale disenfranchise the central IT from managing data. And of course, self-service use being the third, and federated governance being fourth. And they tried to play an interplay between fabric concepts of activated metadata and knowledge graphs, which are still very new in concept, with the concepts of data mesh. I think there's a lot to be proven out in these modalities, in these ways of thinking about structuring your data and your data teams and the relationships with the business. So they gave you some useful insights on that. But at the end of the day, I think we're still obviously going to have the physical layers of the data estate. We have storage and compute and consumption. Those are the physical nuts and bolts. We're going to have those. They can be in a centralized and decentralized form. They can be highly prescriptive in the way that you do the data modeling and data warehousing, or they can be, less prescriptive. So managing them with fabric concepts and mesh concepts still very much evolving. Something we're definitely keeping our eye on as we talk to customers. Right now, we think it's a slam dunk to say to customers, yeah, product orientation is probably a reasonable way about thinking about your data artifacts. And two, because IT departments are just slammed with requests, as much as AI is helping, they're slammed with requests. Think about a decentralized approach a la mesh.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we talk about, you've heard for how many years now, data is the new oil, but we haven't actually gotten any sort of real value out of that, because the way that we've approached managing data has still been pretty serialized. And being able to look at data much as similarly as you would look at an app sitting in an app store. So the concept of moving that more as a product is certainly, I'm sure, something that's much more warranted. Another topic that came up, top 10 best practices for Gen AI, and I'll just read a few off of here, many of which will be set aside for future conversations that we'll have. But think about responsible AI from the start, focus on AI and data literacy, seamless human and AI collaboration, composable Gen AI architecture, robust data engineering, FinOps practices for Gen AI, process to prioritize the use cases, pilot use cases for scalability, the build versus buy framework, and a product approach to Gen AI. Now, there's a couple of these that I'd like to tease out, but let's talk a little bit about FinOps practices for Gen AI. You mentioned something about the model selection as an example.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of seeing a trend now where models are kind of shifting into this kind of three size mode: small, medium, and large. We just saw this, of course, with Anthropic, and the three. I think Mistral has taken a similar approach. We'll see if the others. I think, well, of course, Gemini has as well, Junior Pro, and I don't know, Deluxe, something like that. We'll see if OpenAI carries that theme forward. So one is just model selection in terms of the right prompt for the right need, the right model, and then they could be open source models as well. So that's one to control FinOps. The other thing that I think was interesting was, just the management level of, you can see that, say, OpenAI charges 0.00x cents or whatever it is per 1,000 tokens. And you can maybe lull yourself into a false sense of security that that's awfully cheap. And boy, you have to do a lot of times. Well, look, you can get to 1,000 tokens per session, per user, per day, per concurrency rates, et cetera. You do that math. And I think a call out for leaders is, it's obviously one of the top 10. Very important. That cost will get significant if you don't think about ways of curtailing your data or curtailing the sessions and making smart model selections.
Yeah, I think a couple of examples that they gave around things like response caching, right? So like anything else, users are going to ask the same questions multiple times. So how can you utilize LLM caching as a way to cut down on the number of tokens that you're actually consuming? Another one around how we're helping pre-process data and filtering. They gave the Tesla example of all of the data generated by their vehicles, but only sending the data pertinent to level 5 driving in order to process for LLM in order to achieve full service automation driving capabilities. Right. Another one that you hit was talking with Bob Ward, who's a famous SQL dude in your words, and talk a little bit about hyperscale. So can you comment on that?
This one was a really good session. Bob Ward, aka MS/Bob Ward MS, I think is his his site. First of all, very cool dude. He open sources his PowerPoints in true form. I went to his site, and you can find the Gartner folder off his OneDrive, and you can see the presentation. So I would highly recommend people do it. By the way, his presentation is mostly like video demos within PowerPoint, so it's demoable. And one thing he did was he said, look, don't miss out on an opportunity to bring generative AI to your live OLTP systems. So he had the typical like Fabricam or Northwind or whatever data Microsoft rather uses as their standard packaged app, and it was a live website. And I think they had a little chat experience about, a customer said something, it was a nuanced question, but through Microsoft prompt flow, the actual LLM prompt needed to be distilled into some lookups, a lookup into Dynamics or a lookup into a SQL database or a Cosmos database, so that the model got a full and complete picture of what that customer had purchased and what they may have in their basket right now, or what they may be considering, before the LLM made a full and reasoned recommendation. So it was a really cool demo on how, in this case, he was showing off some of the newer features of hyperscale and Azure Search to bring the indexing capability to live applications, as opposed to reasoning over documents that have been sitting around for a while. Right?
Yeah, another great point here is the fact that it looks like hyperscale is now free for life in the subscription. Right, you mentioned that.
Yep.
And how from
very, very small workloads. I mean,
sure.
It's still right.
But from a pricing perspective, at least that SQL is now at getting to more parity than the open source databases that are available in Azure.
That was a big call out that I think you made, and it was something that I was blind to. I did not realize that was the case. And the other thing he said is, don't necessarily go to hyperscale if you think you only profile like the biggest of the biggest workloads, that you can start small and work your way up. So kind of good updates on that product line overall.
That's great. Next one, we obviously had a chance to take a look at a lot of different exhibitors on the expo floor. One of which we talked to was Aporia. A lot because of our concern around helping our clients with these new attack vectors around LLMs and Gen AI, and how we can help provide some guardrails. So had a demo around their LLM Gov, the shim or the API that they're using. Cool demo that he showed around a retail use case with Nike. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, they did a toggle on and off. So they did a before their solution and after their solution demo. So they had the before their solution was really cool. The person logged on to, I think, a fictitious Nike website. And was similar to Bob Ward's discussion, saying, hey, I really like these Nike XYZ shoes. Tell me some other shoes that I want. Well, you know, the individual made kind of a casual prompt, and the LLM may not have seen something like that, and it responded back, well, have you looked at the Adidas ABC models? Whoops, that's not on brand for Nike, right? We don't want that. We don't want that showing up in the chat. So then they flip their solution on, which is an API. And the API captures the prompt going in and the completion coming back. And the prompt going in probably just went through as it was because it was perfectly innocuous. But the completion coming back that contained the competitive information, the solution actually sends that back down to the model and says, try again. But this time respect the fact that Nike doesn't want any, you get it. And then the reasoned answer that came back was appropriate and on brand for the situation.
Yeah, really cool. And just in the spirit of the low code, no code, the fact that when you turn that toggle for rephrase on, the way that you constructed that was using plain old English. Nothing competitive. Don't mention competitive products. We actually saw how that was entered into the prompt. Another one of the great things about Gartner is that we also get a chance to get some one-on-ones with analysts, and we had an opportunity to sit down with Joe and Tell-Me, who is one of the advisors around generative AI. And as we started to talk, we discussed various different potential scenarios from an impact perspective. One particularly on healthcare, like would there be a day maybe that instead of talking to your primary care physician about your health, that you're doing all of that interaction through an application? And the question that popped up was really more of, well, there are a lot of doctors out there, and it's probably going to be through some regulatory or governmental rulings that full use of that capability is probably not going to be around. But then it also got us talking about how AI may actually create competition with providers and payers. Want to talk about that?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting point of view, and you can apply this point of view. It's kind of an arms race point of view, not to be brutal and to be militaristic, but just arms race in terms of reminding yourself that when institution A or organization A wants to use an LLM to broaden its reach or broaden its impact, keep in mind that there might be another institution that would be negatively impacted by the broadening of that impact. And he brought up a good example. He said, if you're a healthcare provider, so you're a clinic or you're a physician or whatever, and you've used now generative AI to recommend additional tests, recommend follow-ups, recommend maybe some secondary care or therapy or et cetera, keep in mind that you have the payer side of that equation as well. And they may be investing in technology that actually finds the indication that a model recommended a piece of healthcare, didn't come from the practice specifically. And you may find that they're ratcheting up back and forth. And again, you can apply that to anything, right? 100%. Where you have an adversarial competitive situation. That was interesting.
Yeah, it's you start to wonder if the idea of capitation and the provisions around ACO will start to maybe bear some better fruit. So with the focus much more on preventative care instead of just acute care there, and making sure that obviously providers are remunerated for savings.
Yeah, that's right.
Another topic that came up was graph. It was obviously mentioned very prominently, along with things like data catalogs and metadata itself. You were attending a session with the chief data scientist from Neo4j. Want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, he did a great British chap. So he joked. He said, because of my accent, you believe everything I say. And boy, I tell you, I fall into that quite often. But brilliant gentleman. And yeah, from Neo4j. Of course, Neo4j, for those that don't know, is a graph database pioneer. Graph databases being different than traditional relational databases. In relational databases, we care a lot about the entity, the table itself, and all of its attributes. The relationship between tables is a little diminished. It's still important, but a little diminished. Whereas in the graph world, it's the opposite. We care about the relationship and between the nodes is much or more than we do the nodes themselves. So, you know, I am one stop away from Rob on LinkedIn, but he's 2 hops away from somebody. And that relationship actually defines how we reason over the data we get back about the 3 of us on LinkedIn, for example. But he brought up some great points, and he made a pretty cool hot take, I think, at the end. He said something to the effect of, look, to really get retrieved augmented generation, or the RAG model, to work well, at least much better than it is today, he was a believer that we need to have graph concepts. So knowledge graph concepts, or these node vertex relationships context between data. Take something like, you know, an outage ticket, an application impacted user X who was affected by outage Y. Provide that to the LLM, give it the ability to reason over those relationships, and it may provide you more of an impactful statement. So anyways, hot take was, I think by 2025, maybe year end, 50% of the solutions ought and should be doing RAG vis-a-vis knowledge graphs or graph databases, and they'll be doing it right, and 50% won't, and maybe they're not getting the full benefit of that solution. So, and it kind of brought home the fact that graph databases, knowledge graphs in general, and graph concepts were a big play this year.
Yeah, and it just reminds me of how much Maha and our development teams talk about making sure that we get data Gen AI ready, and how important context and being able to communicate that context in some sort of way.
That's right.
Is extremely important to get better efficacy out of these models. So final one, Microsoft Fabric. We had a great session, saw a great session from the Microsoft team on that, discussing One Lake, obviously in the importance of being able to simplify the process of managing data, no ETL concepts and things of that sort. But the other thing that was pretty impressive was the fact that they really took a Office 365 type of approach to how they created Fabric from all the various different storage services and components. Any hot takes you have for maybe our other CSP partner out there in AWS?
Yeah, just to pile on, Microsoft's done a brilliant job with Fabric. They've architected some new componentry, the One Lake, and using the common Delta format for all the data types. And there still are the product components. Eventually, Azure Data Factory will be in, but pieces of that, and the data flow piece, of course, Power BI for visuals. Those are all individual products that we could have procured anyway. Synapse Serverless is the other engine that's there. But from a marketing perspective, Microsoft's done a brilliant job of coming up with a pricing unit for all these together, and a nice brand name. So I've had some kind of cheeky discussions with our friends at AWS, and I've said, you know, guys, you have world-class data products as well, obviously. S3 for storage, and of course you could use, you know, formats like Delta and Iceberg and others, and Athena and Redshift and QuickSights and on and on. Why haven't you come up with this kind of unitized umbrella, kind of by the scale piece that unifies them together? I don't know that I got a very good answer. So my hot take is maybe in the next 18 months from AWS, we see a revival of that wonderful ecosystem, including SageMaker and EMR and others, into kind of a unified play. We'll see.
Or maybe it offers us at Presidio here an opportunity to put something together too in the market.
We certainly could. We could certainly give it a nice brand name and sew up some infrastructure as code and do rapid deployments, and you've got an AWS tech stack.
I like Amazon Hail.
Hail?
Amazon Hail.
You said it here first, folks. Said it here first.
All right. Well, that's it. It was a great show. Any last words that you would say, just in terms of what you thought of the show and its value?
Value. Gosh, Gartner just does world class work. It was a world class. The logistics were outstanding. Again, I think this was a transition year. We've seen this before. We've gone to years where things are very mature, and we're reinforcing mature, and we're saying you should be at this maturity level. Some of the sessions are like that, or some of the years have been like that. This year was, well, we have to start over again in some areas. Gen AI is going to be that big of a disruptor. So kudos to them.
Awesome. All right. Until next time, guys. Thank you.